I'm Mike,
And I'm Amber. Welcome to the Covenant Chronicles,
where we tell you the truth about relationships.
giving you the tools to build the foundation you always needed. Welcome back to the Covenant Chronicles.
Yep, you're here. Now you're stuck listening to us now.
Is that what you got?
Yeah.
We had this whole conversation before we started the podcast about how I should do something more engaging to begin. And you were like, I got something.
Yeah, they're stuck listening to us now. You don't have to, but your relationship sucks probably, so you're here for a reason.
Well, that's not very nice.
Yeah, you're right. Okay. Maybe you were just fine-tuning your relationship.
Yeah. Positives here. Positives.
All right, then.
Okay, so there was that engaging moment for the day.
I actually want to talk about when you choose to put God at the center of your vision, right? We've talked about vision before. I talked about some of the things that we do, some of the things that we work towards, and some of the, I guess, ways that we choose, or the ways that we work towards the results we want, right? Talked about having a clear vision for, what you want your results to be in your life, at different set periods. And what I wanted to talk about, and mostly because we've experienced a lot of this last week, is that when you choose to put God at the center of that, say, okay, God, thanks for giving me this vision. Thanks for giving me the outlook for my life. This is yours. Thank you for guiding me in this direction. Thank you for creating abundance. Thank you for, all of these things. And whether it's happened yet or not, coming from a different place, right? Because we see that in scripture. There's scripture that says to pray, there's scripture that consistently encourages relationship with him. There's scripture that tells you to, if basically you're going to ask for something, you ask as if it's already done, right? And all too often, we see this over and over where people are like, oh, please help me with this, please, and they come from this place of scarcity, or this anxious place. And I feel like a lot of times that is the work of the enemy, right? And that might be a bit offensive, but when you look at, hey, I want to lead my life from, Christ-centered, from putting God at the center of everything I do, part of that is going to his word and saying, okay, what does it say about this, right? And there's not a single scripture that says, hey, if you want something, beg and plead and be anxious about it, right? It says quite literally the opposite of that. And so I feel like that's part of how the enemy works on us. But what we found inside of our marriage, inside of our relationship, inside of our lives, is that when you operate from that different perspective, that different lens, and you say, okay, I'm going to thank him for something he's already done, even if it hasn't physically manifested or hasn't been physically created in my life just yet, right? And when we do that, we see this consistent pattern where things change, right? We've been working towards a specific set of results that we want to create in, basically the next 10 years. We have been working towards other things that we want to create in our lives. And what we've found is that sometimes, things that we said, well, I want this to happen, or I want this to happen, he's answered us and said, okay, this is the overall vision for your life. These are actually conflicts, right? And sometimes we've had to accept, hey, okay, maybe this isn't for me. But what we've seen consistently over and over is this pattern in which when we put him at the center and we consistently try to step forward, that it is much like a father in your life telling you, hey, you're on the wrong path, or hey, you're not doing your homework. Hey, you're not doing your chores, right? And there's this correction that comes with it, in which if you want to sit in your emotions and feelings and this victim mindset, oh, these things are happening to me, right? Versus it's a correction of, hey, we're on a path to a specific vision, to specific results in our life. And some of these things, and some of them have emotions attached to them, he shuts these doors for a specific reason. And when we allow him to do that, right? And we've talked about this before, which is vastly different when you are sitting still and taking that as do nothing versus sitting still and listening, right? Sitting still and continuing to step forward, but being in a place to actually hear what he has for you. It vastly changes like how your life operates, right? And we've experienced a lot of that this last week where, we have these specific visions, these specific results that we want in our life. And some of them we might miss the mark on. Some of them aren't for us and we don't understand why right now. And some of them that are congruent with what our grander vision for our life is, when we've failed to, say, make a decision, or we've failed to take steps in that because, well, it's something hard. It's harder than we want it to be. We've experienced where that soil gets tilled up and we're put in this position of now we have to plant new seeds, right? We don't have a choice anymore. And so I think about that in the sense of how often inside of our relationships do we do these things where we, are so reliant on our own understanding, or so reliant on, I have to have perfection right now. Everything has to be 100% resolved. And it has to be the way I think it needs to be, as opposed to just saying, okay, if I'm going to turn it over to him and I'm going to stop having anxiety about it, maybe it's not going to be the way that I think it should be. Maybe I'm not going to get some of the things that I thought I wanted. Maybe I'm not going to be able to walk this path. But as he reveals that clearer and clearer vision, right? It's like you can have things going on in your life that many others would look at and say, wow, this is a problem, or how are you dealing with that, or any of these other things. And it's just like, it's taken care of, right? Maybe you don't have the answer right now. Maybe you don't have that exact response. Maybe you don't have a written carrier pigeon letter that says this is, the next 6 months of your life, right? Mm-hmm. But you start seeing a vision of, okay, let's just take care of this stuff. Let's just handle this. Let's one step at a time and keep stepping towards the vision and the results that he's placed on our hearts. And if something comes up that distracts us from that, trust that he will help us work through that, and that he's going to help till up that soil and allow us to plant new seeds. Mm-hmm. And when you start operating from that perspective, like think about, probably a year and a half ago now, you and I, maybe 2 years ago now, that was probably about a year and a half. We had gone out, we had a night without kids, we went out and we just simply had a night out, right? Dinner, did some other stuff. And we decided, I think it was, we went to go play darts, right? We were just doing something together. And of course, you go play darts where we're at, really the only place outside of your house is at a bar. And so we had gone there, and it was like, we didn't even want to drink. We weren't there to do that, right? And it was like we just wanted to be out and go do something different. And it was that kind of realization, of, we've kind of thinned out everybody in our lives at this point. And you know, who could we even call to like hang out with right now, right?
Yeah.
And it was this shift in mindset. And I bring that up, why I bring that up from a year and a half or 2 years ago is because, as this last week, as this soil has been getting tilled up, there was a couple major things that we had really been avoiding. One of which we just simply weren't making decisions. The other of which, we talked about those. We didn't have with the one we're not making decisions, we'd talked about them. It wasn't arguing. We had great communication, and sometimes it was a little harder than we wanted it to be, but we worked through it in a good manner, and we came to this place, and it was like, okay, well, we have option A, B, and C, and then we would just move on with our day, move on with our night, whatever the case was. And in the other situation, it was, hey, it would become a emotionally charged situation, right? And we struggled with this situation. And what we found ourselves doing is, because all these other areas in our life were so great at communicating, so great about overcoming things, right? Back to the like, we're still human and not perfect. In this specific area, right, we struggled to basically find a way to move forward because emotions would start to come up. It would become this like anchors, and we'd be essentially stuck in the mud, if you will, because of these anchors.
Yeah.
And what happened for us this last week was there was a few things that occurred in our lives that then forced us to make a decision on, the certain areas. And then in the secondary part of that, in this other areas that we were struggling with, that we had these anchors, it got tilled up and it came to like a tipping point, right? And at that point, in most relationships, what you see is where when emotions get heightened and people start to clash, this massive, like, destructive part of the relationship, right? But if you look at that situation, what did we actually do, right? And we've talked about this before in the sense that if you are going to your friends for validation and to just hear what you want to hear, you probably shouldn't be talking about your relationship, right?
Yeah.
And I bring this up, and I brought up the situation with the us going out because we realized we had sorted everything out. Well, by putting God at the center of and continuing down this journey that took, essentially years for us to sort through and years for us to go down the path, what ended up happening is we put people in our lives that when it came to this point, and we had this area of clash, you were able to go to somebody and say, hey, look, I'm struggling with this. I'm obviously not seeing what I need to see. Can you be a sounding board for me to just verbally talk through these situations and come to a conclusion that I need? I don't need validation. I don't need you to tell me this. I don't need you to give me an opinion. I just need somebody that I can talk through this scenario with so I can come to my own conclusions.
Yeah.
And, through that experience, there wasn't, putting down, there wasn't crap talking, any of that stuff. During that, time, I certainly went to a different place. I went to something that is calming and productive for me. One of my hobbies. And what happened is we were able to come back together later. And even though we were still kind of had some friction, right? It was kind of after a little while of us having some friction, we kind of hit a point. It was like, okay, stop. What are we actually doing right now? Well, we have a solution to the problem that all of this started over, correct? Yes, we have a solution. Is it a perfect solution? Well, no, but it's the best solution. And just like most solutions inside of life or your relationship or your business, sometimes once you implement them, they're going to take tweaking to get them to where they really need to be. So it does solve the issue that we had. What is like, what are we even going back and forth about now, right?
Yeah.
And we put a stop to it, and we basically came to this place of, okay, let's move on. Like, why are we, let's love each other, let's reconnect. And this is silly at this point, right? Because all we're doing is going in a circle for nothing, because we have a solution to our problem.
Yeah.
Right. And so I bring all this up because, had we chosen all those times, right, going back to even like that moment where we were sitting in the bar, not even really drinking, just like, I think if one of us had a drink, I feel like the other one at that time, had like a soda or something, like we weren't actively like out to drink. And it was like, we were sitting there acknowledging like, okay, God's going to put other people in our life, right? And even in that moment, the decision over and over and over to say, okay, God, thank you for putting good people in our life. Thank you for creating these results. Thank you for giving us clear vision. Thank you for putting us on the path we need to be. And it didn't happen overnight, right?
Yeah.
But when you look at that and you say, okay, from here at this point, a couple of years ago to here at this point, we have a pretty clear vision of where our life's going to be in 10 years, right? Do we know all the steps in between? No. But we have a pretty clear vision of what it's going to look like. We have a pretty clear vision on the tools we're going to use to help get there. We have a pretty clear vision of people in our lives and how they make our lives better, right? And those people are completely different than the people that were in our lives 2 or 3 years ago, right? And so you look at this and it's this steps of like when you're building your relationship, right? It's the same thing. You and I have gone through these ebbs and flows of like, we're not as connected. Okay, reconnect. We're not as connected, reconnect over the last couple of months. And what's so interesting about that is as we've done that, I feel like we've become closer and closer and closer because we've explored new areas that maybe we haven't tilled up the soil, right? We hadn't planted the seeds over here. And how often do people get so focused on the 10% or the 20%, right, that hasn't been tilled up in their field, whether it's life or their relationship or their work or their business or whatever, that they completely ignore the rest of the field that God is already working. He's already producing fruit, producing crops, right? And then they come from this place of scarcity and anxiety in the 10 to 20% and beg for resolution, right? And then they wonder why their life seems to be in shambles. And it's because you're telling yourself it's in shambles every day, right? You're begging and pleading for Superman to come save you, as opposed to saying, hey, I'm going to put God at the center of this and I'm going to step forward. And I don't know what that looks like, but I'm going to keep stepping forward.
It's funny because I went to like a women's conference thing at the church. I guess it was like 2 weeks ago now. But up there on the board in our bedroom, I posted some notes that I took. I don't usually take very many notes because, well, for one, like I'm an auditory learner, so taking notes, like it doesn't really help me. But I'll usually write down like things that I really want to remember, things that have importance, like, or that I wanted to share with you. But that bottom line on that piece of paper It says urgency is not about rush, it's about intention. So they had a whole thing about how, urgency from God and the Bible, it's not about rush. And that's how we've created urgency in the world, is that if if there's urgency, it means you need to rush, you need to hurry, you need to get it done. But urgency is not about rushing, it's about intention. And so, whenever you feel this like urgency to do something, it's about being intentional in that urgency, which is really what like you've been talking about this whole time, is just being intentional about what you're being called to, what your vision is, even within your relationship and life in general. You feel like it's urgent, like it needs to be done now, fixed now. I got to have all of the things now, but that's not how life works. That's not how God works. It's about the intention and what's going to happen. It takes time. It's not, I asked for it today and later today or tomorrow it's going to happen. That's not how that works. It's about building that over time. There's an intention to it, but you feel the urgency towards that because that's where you're supposed to be going. You're supposed to be being intentional about that thing, which I think, like a lot of stuff has happened with us recently that we often feel urgent about it, but I think it's just because it's where we're supposed to be going, and we're supposed to be putting intention towards that. We've had a lot of, like you've said, things pop up, and like we even have had issues with like starting a life group recently, and just things that kind of happened around that. But in the conversation about it, I did mention like, we know this is the path that we're supposed to be on. And even though like we're trying to be derailed from that path, like we're going to continue going on that path, however that looks. And if we have to change something to make it look just a tiny bit different so that it fits in that path, then we're going to do that, because that's about being intentional about, hey, this is the path we're supposed to be on. It doesn't matter if you're trying to sway us away from that path, we're going to continue trying to be on that path.
Right. Yeah, I think that's, an area that most people struggle with in, I would say, their identity or the vision for their life, is that they look for perfection, right? Or it has to be just right. And is, they lean on their own understanding and allow their emotions to get so caught up in that, right? And to say, because God has already designed your life to work in a certain way, right? And these pieces of the puzzle have to fit together. And sometimes when we're trying to take a piece and we're trying to plug it into the wrong spot, we get frustrated, right? We get emotional, we get overwhelmed, and we want to react, right? Because, well, this is, and I have to stand my ground, and we let our pride get in the way, right? And there's a difference between standing up for yourself and letting your pride get in your way, right?
Yeah.
And when you like look at, for example, like the life group situation and us having to put it into a certain container that it, or shift the container that it was in, we could have easily let like our pride run away with that, right? And it was like, for what? Because when you really think about it, what was our intention? Well, our original intention kind of matches what we're being asked to do anyways.
Yeah.
Okay, well, there's this issue with, this specific part of it. Okay. But to be honest with you, like that specific part of it wasn't part of the original design. It was something that I later added of like, hey, maybe this would be cool, right?
Yeah.
And it was like, so why would we have conflict over something that wasn't part of the original design or part of the intention that like we're holding on to, right?
Yeah.
And I would challenge how many times in life we do that, right? Because what we found is, hey, this thing I designed over here, I'm trying to put into this puzzle piece or to this part of the puzzle, but it doesn't fit, right? And so we had this situation where, okay, well, no, it doesn't fit right here in this corner. But if you shift it up one space, that puzzle piece now fits, right? Okay, well, how does that piece now align over here? And then you look at, okay, well, I built this thing and to stick this puzzle piece here, but really it actually fits better over here, right?
Yeah.
And so I could get frustrated that I'm trying to put this puzzle piece here and it doesn't fit and we're having some type of pushback. But like when you take a step back and say, okay, let's 30,000 foot view my life or our life, right? Like, does it actually make sense, or are we getting wrapped up in our own pride and our own understanding, right?
Yeah.
And we do that with our relationships all too often, right? Where we think that things have to be a certain way because of our own understanding.
Yeah.
Right? And like you said, with the the urgency, it's not about rush, it's about intention, right? And when you look at that, the urgency in our lives, inside of our relationships, that we're putting pressure on these things because we're in a rush, right? We're leaning on our own understanding. We're not putting him at the center of things, and we're not allowing ourselves to step forward, right? And we talked about this because there is that defining the defining line between, okay, I've got this puzzle laid out on the table and I'm trying to put the pieces together. Well, I'm going to put it all in God's hands and he's got to put the pieces together.
Yeah.
Okay. He designed the puzzle, right? And I think that's part of our misunderstanding, is that we think that he's going to put the pieces to the puzzle together. It's up to us, right? He gave us free will for a reason. It's up to us to put the pieces that he designed, that he built, that he painted the picture of, right?
Yeah.
We have to put those pieces together. And where we get stuck is when we're trying to put the wrong pieces in the wrong places. And then we get frustrated because, okay, well, this person over here or that person over there, or this event in my life, this event inside of my relationship.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, have you just thanked him for, giving you the puzzle piece to begin with? I think about it, I actually, one thing that hit me about this sermon from this last Sunday, pastor talking about, these things. And he had talked about, like, with your paycheck, right? If you're at a job and you have a paycheck, you want a raise, but when's the last time you thanked your boss for the paycheck,
Mhm.
right? And I think about our relationship with God so much in the same way. If we're putting him at the center and we're saying, oh, please, God, oh, please, like the raise thing, right? If we connect those dots and say, oh, please, God, give me this raise. I need this raise. It'll change my life. Please, God, please, God. As opposed to, thank you, God, for the paycheck I have.
Yeah.
Right? Thank you for the abundance that you've given me. Thank you for setting me in the direction, right? And if this raise is for me, thank you for that, right?
Yeah.
Or even flat out thanking, we had a situation the other day, and well, about a week ago now, and I was selling something, right? And it had been something I'd posted, it wasn't even that big of a thing, right? I just posted this trailer for sale. And it'd been for sale, I don't know what, a month and a half. And I was pretty set on like, I'm going to get this amount for it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't sell for that. I'm keeping it. I don't really care. Like, it is what it is. We can use it. It's just we're trying to clean up our lives, right? And we're trying to declutter and get rid of things that we don't need. And there'd been some back and forth, right? And initially, like, got some offers well below what I was willing to take for it. And I just flat out said no.
Yeah.
And we come to this place, right, of like, hey, sounds like I have a promising buyer. And, I was taking a shower that morning and I was just having a conversation with God about different stuff. And that thing came to mind. And I came from this place of like, God, thanks for, giving us abundance. Thanks for taking care of this. Thanks for this being sold today. Right. And mind you, this is in the morning. We hadn't met the buyer, hadn't just, hey, thanks for this selling today. Thanks for it selling for, more than my minimum that I'm willing to take. And, thanks for just moving in my life. Right. And it was just like this confident, I'm not asking for anything. I'm saying thank you for this. And just, it's already done, right? Like I already decided. And it was so interesting because when it came to later in that day, trailer was sold. It was a pretty seamless process. And the buyer, he typical negotiating online, right? Sales, whatever. Hey, would you take any less? And I threw out a number, right? That was lower than what I had posted, but it was higher than what I was willing to take, right? And I said, yep, this is my number. And it was like no argument.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And we can sit here and try to nitpick that and be like, oh, it was the circumstance and it was this and it was, but really the more that we've operated from a place of putting him at the center and just thanking him for things being done, thanking him for abundance, thanking him for everything he's done already and all the ways he's moving in our life, and trying to stick to this, like, I know it's taken care of and not worry about anything, even when problems arise. The more I've seen that pattern consistently over and over and over, right?
Yeah.
And we talk about, this whole theory of like, you're going to get what you tell yourself. And I believe that those two things are connected, right? The way that you're praying, the heart posture, the intention, right? Like you said, the urgency, the intention behind that is going to dictate your outcome and your results.
Yeah.
So are you choosing to beg and plead and hope that he's in your life, hope that he's going to be there? Or do you know that he's there? Do you put him at the center? And do you assume that things are already done? And keep in mind, this is not assuming, hey, thanks God for putting $1 million in my bank account tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
That's probably not your path,
realistic.
because
Yeah.
if he hasn't trusted you with that already, it's probably because you've got a lot of soil to till up in your life to plant new seeds before that could be something, right?
Yeah.
You're probably at a place right now where if that's what you're asking for and that's what you're trying to pray for, you're probably at a place that, one, you can't be trusted with that, and two, if you were given that, it would lead to a lot of destruction in your life.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so you choose to not have that understanding of, okay, if it's not right now, or if this isn't my path, well, I'm going to let my heart harden towards God, or, he has this unanswered prayer, or, or I have an unanswered prayer from him, or whatever victim, mindset that we choose to have, as opposed to, hey, thanks for giving me this puzzle. Thanks for painting it so beautiful. Thanks for putting this next piece where it belongs. And, thank you for giving me the vision of how this is going to look.
I want to go back to the puzzle thing real fast, just because I saw like an Instagram, or I don't remember if it was on Instagram or TikTok, whatever. But
Mm-hmm.
anyways, like yesterday, and it was basically the same thing, and I'd never really thought about it like that. Like you, um, the post was like, you've been asking God for a cake, but he gave you flour and sugar and butter and
Mm-hmm.
milk and all the ingredients to make the cake.
Yep.
But because you don't want to collect them and put them all together, you walked away thinking he didn't give you what you asked for. But he gave you all the things.
Yeah.
You just weren't willing to put them together to
Well,
make it work.
and I would take that a step further and say you aren't willing to learn, right? Because how often do we are we given, the components, the eggs and the milk and the flour and the butter and all this stuff, and we aren't willing to learn how to put those pieces together.
Yeah. I just thought it was an interesting perspective, because really we do that. We ask for something, and like you have talked about it before, and we've talked about it on here about unanswered prayers, and I don't think that it was an unanswered thing. I think either he gave you an answer to it, or he gave you all the components to it, and you just chose not to put the components together to make the result that you were asking for.
I mean, that's exactly it, right? Of like, when are we going to, we choose to not put the components together, right? And then we get frustrated because, well, I think that it should have gone this way, or I think that it should have gone that way.
Yeah.
That's cool. I'm glad you thought, I'm glad you leaned on your own understanding, right?
Yeah.
Because that's not what it says in the Bible.
Yeah.
Right. And that's, how often do we do that, right? We do it inside of our relationships. And I think if more people understood that from the dynamic of their relationship, right? Oh, I went through, maybe you went through a season of infidelity 5 or 6 years ago, right? Or 10 years ago, or whatever that is, right? And you struggled with this, and it's still, circling and rattling around in your mind, and like, I'm going to point my finger towards this person, right? I'm not saying that you should condone that behavior, right? And I'm not even saying, hey, like, this should be a thing that, you should tolerate. I'm not saying, hey, you shouldn't leave the person. Ultimately, there's a lot of other factors that come into play there, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what I am saying is that if that is a season that you went through and you've chose to stay with the person, why have you not looked at what God gave you out of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because he gave you something.
Yeah.
Right? He gave you where you had an opportunity to step up, where you had an opportunity to truly learn what it is to forgive. You had an opportunity to take, the 1 Corinthians 13 to heart of not keeping an account of wrongs, right? You had an opportunity to learn what it is, and the partner that committed that infidelity had an opportunity to till up that part of their heart that created that, right? Because we've talked about that, where it's typically, especially for men, some type of validation issue going back to their childhood, and they start seeking validation in the wrong places, right? They start seeking, this validation. They start letting these influences that we have in the world nowadays affect them.
Yeah.
And you've been given all of these opportunities to till up the soil, to plant new seeds, but instead you're sitting here 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years later, holding a grudge against the person and allowing your emotions to still be affected by this. And this is not to minimize the experience, right? Because it's one thing I talk about with like coaching clients is that you're not discounting, you're not forgetting, right? There's a difference between forgiving and forgetting, right?
Mhm.
You don't have to forget. But if you've made the choice to say, I'm going to forgive, then you have to stand on that, right?
Yeah.
And this isn't just about infidelity, right? There's so many things we can talk about inside of a relationship where God has given us all of the ingredients to bake the cake, like you mentioned. And maybe we didn't understand them at the time. Maybe they were harder than we wanted them to be. Maybe it felt like the worst thing ever in that moment. But he gave you all the ingredients to bake the cake. Are you choosing to let the ingredients spoil on your counter because you're so wrapped up in your pride or your own self emotions, right? That you're not going to bake the cake that he's given you the ingredients to make.
Yeah.
And you know, that's I guess the point I wanted to make at the beginning of this is, even if you're struggling to bake the cake, if you are thanking God for the ingredients and you're putting him at the center and you're thanking him for putting you on the path to create the cake, right?
Being intentional.
Being intentional about it. And you're doing that. If you accidentally if you're like, oh man, I don't know if I need 2 or 3 eggs, as you're actively stirring other ingredients, he'll give you the 2 eggs, or you go to crack 3 and he's going to take away the third one, right?
Yeah.
But you have to be moving forward. You have to be intentional about it. You have to be taking the ingredients and actively trying to create. And maybe the first time you try to, put the cake together, it's not right, right? That doesn't mean you've lost all the ingredients and the cake's never going to get baked, because he will continue to keep the things that you need and the ingredients you need in your life to be able to actually create that cake.
Yeah.
But you have to keep being intentional. You have to keep moving forward. You have to keep stepping, and also continuing to lead from a place of gratefulness and praise for the ingredients you've been given, whether you understand, hey, I was given this brown bottle of liquid that later you find out is vanilla, right?
Yeah.
But, or maybe, it's something else crazy that you're, you're like, why would I be given this to put in this cake?
Yeah.
And you have no idea that it's going to create the best cake that you've ever had.
Yeah. Well, on that note,
I would suggest that you look at some areas of your life where you have led from a place of fear and anxiety and begged and pleaded, and you start examining those areas and start tilling up that soil.
Yeah.
Start preparing the soil for new seeds to be planted. And I believe that step, the action step for this podcast, is going to be go spend some time in scripture. And it doesn't matter where you start. Literally just open it and start reading.
Yeah. Yeah. Romans is a good one. I just started on that today.
Yeah.
Got some revelations this morning. Anyways, well, go do that and then come back again later this week for our next podcast.
That's it.
Until next time.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.